Delighted to say Rory Lawson is with us this morning. Rory, good morning to you. How are you?
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm really well, thank you. Excited for a week of action, hopefully, having been starved of it from a Scottish perspective for, 3 weeks now. So, yeah, very much looking forward to the weekend.
We're all a little bit nervous here because normally we get excited when the Scotland game is coming up. We chalk it in as a W at the start of the year. This year, we don't really feel so confident, I've got to tell you.
Yeah, look, and I think probably justifiably so. I think certainly all the messages out of the Irish camp are very different to what the ex-players and pundits and coaches have sort of spoken about the Scotland squad previously. And I had a chat yesterday with Rory Best, and I don't think there's any coincidence actually that both he and Paul O'Connell are talking about the Scotland side being the toughest challenge that Ireland have faced for some time, and the coincidence of both of them being front five forwards, because I think historically, Ireland looked to attack Scotland in the front five, beat them up a little bit, find their edge, and then benefit off the back of it. But I think it's a hardier Scottish front five. I think it's a side that shows their attacking abilities more this year than they did last year. And they've also got a significantly better defence than they did in 2019, and even when the sides last met in early 2020. So I think that it's a different challenge for Ireland coming up against the Scotland side, but I think they might still just edge the favourites tag for me.
Where has the improvement from Scotland come from?
Multiple areas, I think. I actually think Stuart Hogg's done a great job taking over the leadership, and I think he's really started to grow in that role and understand how he can be at his most effective. But I think the big thing for me, that the game starts in that front five. So set piece, scrum and maul. And I think Scotland historically have just been edged by Ireland in that area. And if you're 5-10% off in that contest, then you're likely to be on the wrong end of the penalty count. You're likely to concede a few tries in and around mauls when the opposition get into the 22. And I think Rory Sutherland, across the past couple of years since returning from a horrific injury, has been absolutely outstanding. I think George Turner stepped up in hooker in the absence of Fraser Brown and Stuart McInally. Xander Fagerson, barring the red card, I think is starting to come of age and show his maturity still in his fairly youthful years in the tight head jersey. And I think Johnny Gray's games come onto a new level alongside Scott Cummings, who just continues to get better and better. So I think that's the starting point is the front five. But there's no doubt at all that Scotland have found an attacking flow with Finn Russell back in the conductor's chair in the number 10 jersey. And from that, I think Scotland's attack has got better. And under Steve Tandy, the defence has got better with the likes of defensive leaders Chris Harris in the 13 jersey, who is getting better and better in the Scotland jersey. And I think the return this weekend of Jamie Ritchie will be an important one for Scotland as well. So I think it's all just about these small incremental improvements that all add up to improve the overall team performance, or I guess the danger that the team can pose with and without the ball.
There did seem to be a few moments over the last few years, Rory, where Gregor Townsend was open to a lot of criticism from Scottish rugby fans. There were a couple of bad defeats. I'm not sure if he was under any real pressure, but are you happy that patience has come to the fore and he is still around and still doing a good job?
I think it's the nature of sport that, results dictate how you're measured. And I think sometimes the long game is worth playing. And I think with Gregor, 2019, when Scotland were looking to play the fastest brand of rugby in the world and then went to the Rugby World Cup and, got battered by Ireland physically in that opening game and then couldn't really recover from that. I think that was a huge learning curve for Gregor as a head coach. And he tweaked his coaching team off the back of it. Steve Tandy came in, and the 2020 mantra for Scotland is be harder to beat, be really tough nut to crack. And I think Scotland did that. Their defence got better. It was the best defensive record in the Six Nations, and they were significantly harder to break down. But that was at the expense of the attacking game. 2021 so far has shown a decent balance between the two, albeit, that game against Wales was definitely one that got away. But I think they're now finding the balance between when to be pragmatic, when to keep the ball in hand and be ambitious, and all built upon a stronger set piece that I spoke about, and a defensive line that looks more solid than it has done for a long time, and is tougher to break down. So we'll see more at the weekend. They've had 3 weeks to stew on that loss against Wales, and it'll have been a hugely frustrating time, but I expect them to come out with massive energy and intent on Sunday afternoon.
No fear of rustiness because of the 3 weeks off, and obviously a lot of players will have got some time with their clubs, but is there like a, you know what the intensity of these campaigns is like? Do they actually, is it better to be rolling week to week, or is it actually not bad to have a couple of weeks off to get into the classroom, do some study, do some video analysis, have those conversations, try and fix the things?
I think the players would have been desperate off the back of the Wales game to just take that one rest week and get back into action. It will have been hugely frustrating. And there's always a fear of like having to nudge a bit of the rust away from 3 weeks without action for the bones of the squad. Don't get me wrong, the likes of Stuart Hogg played for Exeter at the weekend, but on the whole, the squad will return fresh, and because it's a Sunday game, you've got that extra day to recover anyway. So for those guys that have played, but I think Scotland now look more comfortable within what they're trying to do. They look much clearer with regards to their strategy and how they're looking to attack first phase and then multi-phase off the back of it. Their kicking game looks like it has more purpose, and that's such a huge part of the game now. But there's no doubt at all they'll be desperate to have a really strong opening quarter at home against Ireland, because this game is bigger than just Sunday's result for me. This is the opportunity to lay down a statement. I think for both sides, it really is. It will go a long way to defining their Six Nations. If Ireland don't win this and they're one win from four, then they're staring down the barrel of a best case scenario fourth place finish. If they win, then they're looking at a comfortable top half finish. And it's very similar for Scotland. They're 1 from 2 at the moment. But if they manage to pick up a win on Sunday, back that up with a win against Italy the following week, back at BT Murrayfield, then you go to Paris potentially with the chance at going for a title shot. So it's a huge afternoon on Sunday, and that's even without talking about the relatively few occasions whereby Scotland are going to have the opportunity to match themselves against Ireland before the Rugby World Cup. And I think psychologically that is also an important factor. We're kind of sick of playing Scotland in the Rugby World Cup, I've got to tell you. I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. Especially because I heading up to the game in the last Rugby World Cup, I thought, ooh, Scotland have really improved. All the stuff that you talked about, the tight five improving, the defence structure, the attacking game plan, we literally expected that to manifest itself in Japan, and there was just no sign of it. Now there was a few bounces of a ball here and there. I think ultimately, in retrospect, the score definitely flattered Ireland, particularly the way we played in the rest of the tournament. But I guess the point I'm trying to make here is that Scotland are a couple of years behind where we thought they would be, but they're finally coming good. Yeah, and look, I think this is for me, this championship was about trying to string together 5 performances, or as close to 5 performances as possible, to be able to actually measure where are Scotland at the moment, because we've all seen great Scotland wins in the past few years, but not consistently. And I think this is, for this crop of players, which is the best Scotland squad for 20 years, I think the results and performances that lead to those results are really important. And I think the World Cup was undoubtedly a massive slap in the chops for Scotland. Went in with really high hopes and ultimately crashed out in the group stages. I think that Ireland game set the tone, and it was difficult, really difficult for Scotland to be able to reel things back in. When I look back to that, I think I was out at the Rugby World Cup, and I thought at the time there was a huge element of tactical naivety when you took into consideration the the opposition, more importantly, probably the conditions. They just weren't suited to the style of play that Scotland set out to play, whereby you're playing in humid conditions, a sweaty ball, really difficult handling conditions, and yet Scotland tried doing so from inside their own half, almost fueled by, the successes of a win against England at Murrayfield, flinging the ball around willy-nilly, and the passes sticking. But when it came to it, Ireland squeezed them, just throttled the life out of them, and broke down the defence all too easily to register a comfortable win. I think this Scotland side now, I believe, is starting to come of age, show signs of coming of age. But the results and building the momentum through the next 3 games is going to go a huge way to how the public, how the media like ourselves, how people within their opponents start looking at Scotland, because all too often, and Ireland being a prime example, Scotland have rolled over all too easy. If you match them and knock them over up front and give it to them rough, then they'll go away eventually. But I think there's a bit more steel within the Scotland side now.
This is something that was picked up on last year after the Nations Cup game between the sides. Eddie O'Sullivan was on television duty, and Stuart Hogg had just given a TV interview saying we're onto something special here, despite the fact that Ireland had beaten them again. And Eddie didn't take too kindly to this. He says they've always talked themselves up. They always talk a great game. They have some deluded notion that they are better than they are. These guys haven't won here in 10 years, he said. It's just deluded. They talk themselves up, they come in, and then they implode. Does something like that get under the skin of Scotland? Does it register in Scotland at all?
It registered with me. It's headline grabbing stuff, isn't it? And it does frustrate me. What you do realise though, it frustrates me because that isn't the view of the players within that Ireland squad, and I think that's something that is very clear. Ireland, speaking to Bestie yesterday about it, when Ireland prepare to play against Scotland now, they know that they need to have an edge to them. They need to be ready for it, take nothing for granted, because it's a game that they expect to win, but it's a game that they have to give the proper respect to. I think Eddie O'Sullivan's comments frustrated me, being someone outside of the squad. And I did think to myself this week, because they still ring a little bit in my ears when I think about playing against Ireland, that if I was coaching Scotland, if I was in Gregor Townsend's shoes or one of his assistants, would I use that as ammo coming into this game? I'm not sure I would, because I think it's a misrepresentation of the team and the views of the side and coaching team that they're coming up against. But it certainly grabbed a few headlines. Easy for him to stay on the touchline as somebody who isn't involved in the game outside of talking about it. But it certainly grabbed the attention of many, and he's not been alone in that. I remember Ronan O'Gara saying similar probably 4 years ago, maybe, and it's justifiable, because when you take into account the records between the two sides after Scotland had dominance for a decade coming into this millennium. But since then, Ireland have had the upper hand. Scotland have only finished above Ireland once in the 21 previous Six Nations in the table, albeit they've won games. It's about time that Scotland turned the tide and shifted the dial a little bit on that.
I think the Ronan O'Gara comment was, I hope we hammer them. They're too mouthy, but they can't back it up. And that was right before the 2017 game, which it was like, in fairness, if you're going to be an Irish pundit, there are a multitude of times you could have said that and been sitting there smug afterwards. He just got that a little bit wrong, because 17 is when, obviously, the Ireland bus gets delayed and Murrayfield is just this a hellhole for Ireland on that occasion.
Yeah. And look, it's one of the great debates. Something that I do a bit of work in with some guys is, how much do you allow the external noise of the media, of social media, to impact your week, positively or negatively going into a game? Because the reality is that it is there. It is there for you to consume. And I played alongside plenty of blokes who went to the newspaper or onto social media after they had had a great game and wanted to read about all the positive stuff that everybody was saying about them. But then they weren't happy when the journalists or, keyboard warriors started talking them down when they had a poor game. And I know a number of guys distance themselves from it now. I think it's important to be able to have control over that with however you use it, because, sometimes people do need to be told what a great job they're doing from external sources, but equally you need to be able to take it from elsewhere. But how you manage that noise that's coming externally is a hugely important part of the game. I've spoken to world-class players, British and Irish Lions, who have historically, the first thing they've done when they've gone into the changing room afterwards is gone onto Twitter to see what people are saying. And that's not healthy. But, I think for me, you can use that external noise if you understand how to manage it. But it's easier said than done, because there are plenty of people the world over, in and out of sport, and in politics and current affairs, who are very, very happy to tell you that they do a better job from the sidelines with a pint in hand.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because you play with fire a little bit if you try and manage it. If you're like, if you make that decision, I'm going to try and use the bad stuff as fuel and I'm going to use the good stuff as fuel, it's very hard, because human beings, well, we like to think we have thick skins. Ultimately, we don't. We're very fragile.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I worked with a guy, there's a pal of mine who worked with some guys, and I won't say anybody, any names, but there was an individual within a Six Nations team, and this guy told me a story about how he had gone in to talk to the team about the management of themselves around social media, how it could impact performance, how it can, essentially, we all know it can fritter away time to a horrendous extent. If just flicking up through your screen on whatever it might be, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, I don't even know. But I've been guilty of it previously. But there was a guy, and again, this is a different story and a different British and Irish Lion, but he was really affected by some negative comments, and there was a particular troll who went after him. Win, lose or draw, he would go after him hard because he didn't think that he should be in this site. And the consultant pal of mine did managed to track down the IP address wherever he was sending these from, and had brought up a sort of picture of where this guy was, and because he was hidden behind whatever picture he had wasn't actually of him, and the player was being rocked by the sort of tweets that were being sent to him by this bloke, and he said, "You're allowing this bloke who lives wherever he lives," and he was able to show him in this house, "you're allowing him to dictate your performance on the international scene, your mindset when you're off field, thinking about training, thinking about your own performance, managing yourself in preparation for a game. You're allowing that troll who's sat behind his keyboard in his underpants, eating a pie and drinking a pint, to impact on your week." And I think it really struck the guy and started opening up his mind, because you can get caught in this bubble whereby there's so much noise that you just can't filter it. And it's so easy to say, if you can manage it, great. But it's also, there are very, very few guys who don't engage with social media at all.
Yeah.
Because it's the nature now with regards to, whether it's off-field commercial opportunities or engagement with fans, because at the end of the day, it's a great platform to be able to engage with fans, engage with charities, engage with potential partners, people who you might be able to do work experience for, or look for career advice. There's so much good to come out of it, but sadly there is also an awful lot of negative noise that is difficult to cut through.
Rory, there was one last thing that I wanted to ask you about. You're Bill McLaren's grandson, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Look, we had him in studio when he was doing his book, and it was supposed to be a 12 to 15 minute interview, but he ended up spending 50 minutes with us, and I found the tapes again recently. And it's just amazing. It was like an incredible privilege to spend time talking to him about being a spotter in the army in the war. I can only imagine what it must have been like growing up listening to that voice, and now what it must be like when they show the old films, and the defining thing of the era is actually the quality and the timbre of the voice.
Yeah, look, I'd love to hear that interview, because it's something whereby I think he was so well known for being behind the microphone when live action was in play, but he very rarely did things like that. So I'd love to hear that interview. He was, I'm short of superlatives every time that I'm asked about him. This is one of his big sheets on the wall behind me, his preparation notes from for every commentary that he did, which was phenomenal. I think, the big thing that he summed up was just the preparation that he put into everything, the respect that he gave the game and the viewers of the game and the players of the game to get himself absolutely right. And I saw it firsthand. I saw him put in 40-hour working weeks to prepare for a commentary, which, bear in mind, for the biggest chunk of his 50-year career, he had, without the internet, without Google, without any club website or international website, without that player data or apps that we can now, we now take for granted. He was working out of rugby annuals or calling up the team manager to find out some information about, in the amateur era, what people are doing for jobs, and what their parents have done, and how many kids they have, and what they had for their breakfast, and all that kind of stuff. And the detail that he went into, the desire to do the best job he could to engage people, entertain people, and inform people ultimately, was beyond anything that I had ever seen before. And I didn't really understand it, but it set the platform for him to go out and do what he did, because his voice was incredible. His turn of phrase was incredible. We had it when we were the grandkids, charging around in the park in Hawick. He was a PE teacher. He loved sport. He had a passion and energy for life, and no matter what the sport was, he loved it. And that's definitely carried into me and others within, others throughout the family. My mum could sit in a rugby studio and give better insight than half the pundits who do it, because she is so knowledgeable about rugby, having grown up around him and had a passion for it. And obviously my dad played for Scotland as well. And listening to Papa commentate on my dad scoring 2 tries for Scotland against England in 1976 still makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And he was a phenomenon, and I'm due him an awful lot, because I could still probably go into the majority of rugby pubs in the world and have someone buy me a pint just by mentioning his name. Such was the impact that he had around the world. So he was a very, very special commentator and broadcaster, but he was, above that, he was such an incredible, heroic man, and just somebody who I strive to just be a little bit like in the way that I show up on a day-to-day basis.
Well, it's a great lesson to learn. I'll send you the MP3 and we'll republish it, actually. That's a great idea. But Rory, you've been great with your time. That's an amazing testimony you've just paid to your grandfather. I hope you enjoy the game, but not too much this weekend.
Yeah, well, look, I was one of, I think, 11 or 12 Scots to experience the first Scotland win at Twickenham in 38 years. So every time that I get the opportunity to broadcast on these games at the moment without crowds, I feel even more privileged than normal. So, but I will certainly be hoping to see a Scotland win, albeit with my neutral co-commentator's hat on Sunday afternoon.
Good stuff. Great to talk to you. Thanks a million. Cheers.
Thanks for having me. Cheers.